Hey everybody, JesseMorrell here, and my mission trip to Hawaii is coming to an end. But I wanted to do a quick book review because, well, some of you know I'm a pretty ferocious reader. I have a huge library. I'm constantly reading books. Usually I'm reading 2, 3, 4 books at a time, actually. And while I was here, see, I brought like 3 books with me to read while I was here. But my host home has a book that on J.C. Penney, Merchant Prince, originally published in like 1963. This is an original first edition, I think. I started reading this when I was here visiting them 2 years ago, and I came so close to finishing it, but I had like 4 or 5 chapters left at the end, and so I was able to borrow this this time around and finally finish the book. And I wanted to start doing these book reviews because, you know, life is all about learning, and the more that you learn, the more that you can do. Life is really a journey of learning, and book reviews can give you a really condensed understanding of a book without taking the time to read it. You know, it took me a few days to read this book. This video is going to be probably under an hour, 30 minutes, I have no idea. But you can get the key points out of a book by these book reviews, so it's sort of a shortcut. I remember actually a lot of the information in this book, I think, I learned from my grandmother when I was just like a kid. I think my grandmother must have read this book. What a lot of people don't know is that J.C. Penney, or the J.C. Penney store, used to be called the Golden Rule Store because J.C. Penney based his business principle on the Golden Rule. That's what his father taught him. His father was a lay minister, a Baptist preacher, I think, in Missouri. And so there's different, you know, Christian principles you could get out of this book, which is why I was interested in reading it in the first place. So to start with, J.C. Penney, like I said, this is a 1963 edition, published by Beatrice Plum. You can find this on Amazon. It's like, the lowest was like $70, the highest was like $700. I just borrowed it. I don't actually own it. I wish I did. But you can find it on other websites like abebooks.com for like $22. That seems like the price I'd be willing to pay for it. But give you the quick condensed version of his life, of his story. Like I said, he's the son of a preacher. So J.C. Penney was a pastor's kid. His father was a farmer, but also a lay preacher. So he would preach at the church in Missouri until when he was young. J.C. Penney, remember his father having some type of heated debate, theological discussion, held to some unpopular views about something. I don't think it really specified what, but he ended up being, you know, called like a heretic and kicked out of the church. And so, you know, J.C. Penney kind of had a bad experience as a young child in the church. Eventually came back and had quite a few different experiences with God, where he considered himself a born-again new person. Whether that was genuine or not, you know, I don't know. But I'll tell you the story. So when he was very young, 8 years old, his father told him that he had to start buying his own clothes with his own money. Can you imagine that when you're 8 years old? And his father wouldn't give him any direction or ideas as to how he could earn his own money. So he was taught entrepreneurialism and self-reliance and, you know, to develop a financial mind at a very early age. Now, his father was poor and had multiple children, so I suppose it was also out of necessity. But at 8 years old, he had to come up with some business ideas as to how he was going to earn money so he could pay for his own clothing. First, he found that one of the neighbors needed help because they're farmers with the hay. And so he volunteered his time and service and earned some money with, you know, harvesting the hay. But then he had all this money, and with half of his money he bought shoes, and with the other half he was smart and he invested it in some other way of generating income. He invested it in pigs. So now at 8 years old, he's got a little herd of pigs that are multiplying, and he has to feed them, so he has to figure out a way to feed them. So he offered the neighbors, if he could get all their scraps, leftovers after every meal, then he'd wash their dishes and return their dishes to them, you know, washed and clean as a fair trade. And so he would get all the leftover food, and they would get back their clean dishes without having to wash them. And so that's what he did. He rounded up a bunch of dishes from the neighbors, got a lot of leftover foods, and now he's got his herd of pigs being fed and taken care of. Eventually, the neighbors started to complain, I guess, the smell of pigs. And so his father told him he has to stop this pig business altogether. And this is where he's first learning the principle of the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Of course, he was pretty disappointed. His business was multiplying and growing, but to follow the golden rule, he had to stop this pig business. They weren't pig farmers. Their neighbors were close by, and so his father instilled that into him. So that's a good principle, that you don't consume all your money, you have to invest it. That's the problem with most people. They're just consumers, and you can be a consumer of anything, but if you just consume all your money, then it's gone, and you're stuck in the rat race, as they call it. So you have to learn to invest and make a profit, which is what he learned at an early age of 8. So his father told him, he wants him to make money, but not at the expense of other people, like the neighbors. His next business adventure in the book as a young man after that was buying a horse, but it was a wild horse, and he ended up selling that at a loss. He made obviously some money back, but he learned sometimes you suffer loss. You take a risk and it doesn't pan out. You need to know your industry. He didn't really know much about horses. He bought a bad deal, and that's part of the problem with going into a business blind and you taking a big risk. You come out with a suffering loss. At the age of 17, his father gave him 4 acres of land that he could grow whatever he wanted and keep the money. So he started to grow watermelons, and he had to find a way to distribute and to sell these watermelons. So he rented, or he borrowed, a wagon from his father, and he went door to door selling watermelons, and all is good until the town fair was going on, or festival, and he took his cart of watermelons to the front gate of the festival and started selling them, 10 cents per watermelon or what have you. And his father eventually came out, and he thought his father would be pleased with him that he found this opportunity, all this traffic coming to this festival. It's like a street preacher. We preach at the gate of the festival. That's where all the traffic is. He was thinking he could sell all these watermelons at the front gate and make a killing, and he was making a killing. He was catching everyone as they were going in, selling fresh watermelon on a hot day. Very refreshing. But his father came out furious, because there were vendors inside the festival who had paid good money to be in the festival, and he was kind of cutting them off short by selling to everyone before they even got in there, that it was an integrity issue. And so his father again explained to him the golden rule, and to have good principles in your business practices. So that was his next venture. Eventually his father was dying, and so his father arranged for him to become a clerk at a retail store. Now, some parents don't think of it this way, but when you bring a child into this world, you're supposed to educate them and train them, and they're really under your guardianship and provision until you get them self-sustaining on their own accord. And so, I think there's a proverb amongst Jewish people that you get your child like a degree, or else you're teaching them to be a beggar, because it's a cultural thing that you're supposed to teach them and train them, help get them on their feet financially, economically. So anyways, he got him a job as a clerk at a retail store for a man named Mr. Hall, and he was being picked on and hazed by all the other clerks for very little pay. I guess he wasn't getting paid very much. Eventually, he wanted to head west. His father died, and he just wanted to launch out on his own, so he went to Denver. But again, he got a job as a clerk at a retail store, selling dry goods. He was getting hazed by the other clerks. They weren't treating him right. And he realized that this retail store was selling 2 different types of socks. One was a higher price, one was a lower price, but they were the same quality. And he had a qualms of conscience that he was selling these socks that were the same quality for different prices. He felt like it was a rip-off, it was unfair. He got into an argument and a dispute with the owner over it, and eventually decided he was just going to quit. So he quit that retail job over that, and he determined that he wanted to have his own store. You know, he had his, this is a pretty young man, but he had his experience working for others, and he wanted to have his own store that would treat people right and be based on the golden rule. An opportunity arose, you know, he saw a butcher shop for sale. And to make a long story short, somehow he ended up becoming the owner of this butcher shop. Now, he obviously worked in retail and dry goods. A butcher shop was a different industry, but he was a farm boy, and he understood meat and cattle and, you know, meat. And so he was running a good butcher shop for a while. Their biggest client apparently was the chef of the local hotel. But apparently being the new ownership, he didn't understand or know that this hotel chef was used to getting a kickback, which was a bottle of whiskey with every order. So he'd order from your butcher shop if it came along with a free bottle of whiskey. The guy's a drunkard. So he found out this is what the chef wanted, and originally he met the demand of this guy's you know, request for a free bottle of whiskey along with his order of meat. But he started having problems of conscience again with it. It felt like you know, it was basically a bribe, and that it was unethical. And so he finally made up his mind. He told the guy that I'm giving you good meat, it's a good deal, but you know, no more free bottles of whiskey. But that was enough for that chef to decide to take his business elsewhere. And make a long story short, he lost his butcher shop. So he's going through these hardships. You have to understand, life is about hardships that you have to overcome. Life is about solving your problems. So here is another big setback. You know, I think all of us at one point or another lost a job. Here he just lost a business. It's not a question of you know, if these things happen to you. It's a matter of when they happen to you and how do you respond to them. So he swallowed his pride, went back to the retail business. Worked for a man named Mr. Callahan and also another man named Gus Johnson. Now, here's a lesson in association, because they say, like, you become like your friends within 6 months. Whoever you hang around, you'll be just like them in 6 months. And I certainly see how that was true in my life. 18 years ago, when I wanted to change my life, I was in rehab, and I was a part of the party scene and the drug culture, and I knew that I learned in rehab that you needed to change people, places, and things. I had picked up a lot of bad attitudes, bad ideas, bad behaviors. People taught me, you know, how to sell drugs, how to steal. I taught people how to sell drugs, how to steal. There's this law of association. Anyways, he's back in this retail business, and these men gave him a business idea. You see, they wanted to train up their store clerks to become store managers and partners in the retail business. So they had a plan for growth. So they offered to JCPenney to become a partner and a store owner if he would manage the store and put up, you know, half of the money, and he had to save for it. And so this was a business plan that they had, and this idea in his mind. So he started working that model, and he ended up at the age of 32 having 3 stores that he was a partner in, because then once he had a store, then he would raise up a clerk who would become a manager, who would then become a partner. And so it was a multiplying system, a growing system. This is how the JCPenney store got started. So you get the law of association. He picked up this business model from them. After a little while, by the time he was 32, his partners wanted to dissolve the partnership with him for whatever reasons. It doesn't say, but they offered for him to buy the 3 stores that he was a half partner in. So that's what he did. He bought those stores outright from his partnership, and then continued the system on his own, raising up a store clerk to become a future partner and manager of another store. He, at least when JCPenney got started, liked to be in the small towns. He felt like he really knew the needs of the farmers and of the miners and of the small town folk. And so that's another key lesson, is to know your industry, to know your customers, to know your clients, to know their needs. And so he stayed away from the big cities at first because he wasn't a big city boy. He had opportunities to start stores in these big cities and to make a lot of money in the retail business there, but he stayed in his zone of knowledge, which is another very good business principle. A lot of people lose a lot of money when they go into other industries that they're really not familiar of, just like he did as a young man getting into the horse business. He didn't really know anything about horses. He bought a bad deal and he made a loss there. So this partnership, this growth plan, is what really impressed me with JCPenney. You have to have a model for growth. I have friends who do discipleship, and really the Great Commission is God's plan for Christian growth, for multiplying churches. Go into all the world, preach the gospel, make disciples. I have friends who have a campus ministry, and what they do, they find, like, I think it's like 3 people to mentor, to disciple for a year. And then after that 1 year, those 3 people have to go find their own 3 people to disciple and to mentor, who then find their own 3 people to disciple and mentor. And they've been doing this system for many, many years now. And last I knew, they were baptizing on the campus for their ministry. They were like baptizing like hundreds of people, and they have a membership of like 400 people now. And all these people are being discipled or being disciplers. So it's a system for growth. When my ministry first got started, I took on the road 2 other guys with me. We lived in a minivan, we traveled and we preached. And then the following year, I continued with the team, and then another brother started his own team, got his own van, got 2 other guys with him. So now we were 2 teams. It was a system of growth. That eventually fell apart because of disagreements on theology and other issues. It would have been better, and eventually I hope to start like a training school where we could have theology and evangelism training along with a system of growth like that. But that would be better, kind of like what YWAM did in their early days with they started with their school of evangelism, but then moved on to their school of discipleship to really give these people a better understanding. So you have to have a plan of growth. So he went from 3 stores. Eventually, it grew by the hundreds. He got up to 500 stores, and when he got up to 500 stores, he actually bought the stores of his old partners who first gave him the idea. I think they were up to like 20 stores or something themselves, but he bought their stores, and so he was up to 500, went up to like 700, eventually went up to like 1,700. At one point, it was even going to merge with Sears. So you have to know what you're doing and have a business plan for growth. It's important. So it's called the Golden Rule Store, and that was the principles. But he had, again, different hardships. His first wife died when he finally got established as a young man. Him and his wife were going to go on a big trip, travel, I think, across the world. I think they were going to go to Jerusalem together. But his first wife died right before that trip. Like, he booked the tickets and everything. They planned it all. They mapped it out. And then she died of pneumonia. And this really devastated him. He was tempted heavily towards alcohol, his thoughts of suicide, really had a hard time. He would go for these late night, midnight walks, and finally one night was walking and heard a church singing songs, and it was drawing him in, and he went to this church and he heard a testimony from a man, and he really found some deliverance in the Lord. He said, according to him, he said he found Jesus there, that he had never known Jesus before, and now he went back into the business world completely changed. With instead of trying to quote, run from, or trying to run away from life, he was going to face life as it is. And that's just part of growing up, realizing that life is mountains and valleys. Actually, it's like the ocean. I got the ocean behind me. The tide comes in, the tide goes out. The rough tides, rough seas, calm seas, seasons and changes. That's life. You have ups, you have downs, you have good times, you have bad times. You have to learn to accept life as it is. And so he went back to business, a better man, a grown man. There was this issue with as his industry continued to grow, they needed more capital for their expansion plans. But his business model made it difficult for him to get business loans because he wasn't just a corporation. It was all these private partnerships he had with all his many store managers. And so his loans were based on his own personal credit rather than on like the credit of a corporation. And so eventually the banks said, look, you're kind of maxed out here. You need to register as a corporation to get a bigger loan or a better loan or what have you. But he wanted to be true to his partners. His whole business was based on giving clerks an opportunity to become an owner. And all these managers just, otherwise would never have had a chance to become an owner of their own store. He was mentoring them and training them and giving them these opportunities. So he was true to his partners and didn't want to betray them. They worked out different ways. It was kind of complicated where they could. Eventually, I think that they did become a corporation, the JCPenney Corporation, and all his managers became stockholders. And so they became the stockholders, so they still were owners, getting percentages of the profits and all, but eventually they did become the JCPenney Corporation. But it was a big issue for him not to in any way betray his partners. He also came up with this system of centralized buying. Once the stores became so large that it used to be the individual store managers would go out and buy the merchandise that they felt their store needed for their community. As they grew, JCPenney really wanted to have a centralized warehouse for one person who would buy all the merchandise for all the stores, and it would operate the way it works now. And but this was pioneering it back in the day. And they were pioneering into communities that didn't have. America was developing. This was in 1900s, early 1900s, and America's developing. New communities are being built up, the railroads and all of that. And so by having, he's catching the trend of the needs of the developing communities for retail goods. It's kind of like. Catching trends is like when there's the gold rush. You have to, lots of people made money during the gold rush by finding gold, but there's other people who made money during the gold rush by selling shovels. And so, you have to just meet their needs as their needs are developing and changing. And that's what JCPenney, the stores, were doing. Now, there's a lesson with that in the modern day because the marketplace is changing and JCPenney is struggling. Sears is struggling as well. We'll get to that at the end. I want to talk about that, but so as he continued to grow, he had hundreds of stores. Even then, over 1,000 stores. He got into philanthropy, started different organizations that were educating people, helping people. He started a community for aged ministers to live with their wives who had given their life in service of the gospel and now were elderly and financially in need. And so he started a community for aged ministers to live with their wives, that sort of thing. His business started making millions. Of course, JCPenney now makes billions. Then came the Great Depression. And this would have been late 1920s, early 1930s. And sure enough, even JCPenney and the Penney Corporation suffered during the Great Depression. He basically lost everything. He had some bad investments with a bank in Miami. He became a poor man after, he thought he made so much money, he was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But his stock, like JCPenney went to the stock market. They went to the live market just like days before the market crashed during the Great Depression. So that was a huge hit. Like the JCPenney stock, I think, went from like $150 a share all the way down to like $13 a share during the Great Depression crash. So he lost a lot of money. He went broke. He went into his own depression, thinking he was a failure. He went back to even hard labor, working on a farm, I believe. Just thought he was a failure. One night thought this was his time, he's going to die, he's having health issues, but he didn't die. Instead, he was at some home somewhere. I think it might have been a hotel or something. But he again found a church service that was going on right there in that building. And again, he had this encounter with God where everything changed for him. He felt like he was really made a new man at that point. He didn't want to die anymore. He went from blaming others for his circumstances to criticizing and critiquing himself, which is really important for any type of change and improvement in life. Not to just passively blame other people or other circumstances. Because when you blame external circumstances, there's nothing you can do about it. Nothing you can change, no way you can improve it. But if you critique and analyze yourself, you take responsibility, then things can get better. That was key for me in my life 18 years ago, going in and out of jail and in rehab and all. Instead of blaming other people for my drug problems or blaming outside external circumstances, just to take full responsibility for myself. So that was something he did. But more importantly, he went from just being self-reliant. For the first time in his life, he said he started to rely on God and believing that God was going to get him through this, that God would see him through, that life wasn't over for him. And he was like having a Job experience, Job who lost it all, but the latter end was better than the beginning. And so you have to remember that when you go through hard times and hardships, you're not the only one. It happens to all of us. But you can rely on God, and He can help get you through, and the latter end can be even better than the first. So eventually the business continued to grow during the Great Depression, even though they weren't making the profits that they were making. Their business model for growth was still in play, and eventually, obviously, the country came out of the Great Depression. But then came World War II, and he said he had like 5,000 of his employees got drafted into the war. And so women came and took their place, and the women really helped get Penney through the war. Really, the women stepped up and helped the whole country get through the war. As the men were off fighting the battle, the women now had these opportunities they didn't have before, which I think is fine temporarily during times of war for that to happen. Obviously, I believe in traditional roles of men and women. Men go to work and women tend to the home and raise the kids. Times of war are always an exception. He also started, I wanted to read out of the book here, page 118. He had principles for his business that he taught all the managers and all the employees. It's called Penney Principles, which I thought were pretty good. The Penney principles were these. Number one, to serve the public as nearly as we can to its complete satisfaction. Now, obviously, the golden rule is a biblical principle, but it's a good principle for business. Treat others, as you would like to be treated. And so, you build up a trust with your clientele, and they come back for business. It's good for businesses to be honest. Christian men would make the best businessmen if they're living by Christian ethics. There's other principles in the Bible for good business. I always thought it was interesting, like the Bible says, he who wants to be the greatest among you, let him be the servant of all. Well, if you want to have the greatest business in whatever industry you're in, you need to just serve the most amount of people. And so obviously that's not a business principle per se. It has implications that can be taken for business principles. He who wants to be the greatest among you, let him be the servant of all. Anyways, that's what business is all about, serving the public. I had a scammer contact me. See, I was trying to find like a temporary rental for my family. We were traveling, and I went through Craigslist, which isn't the best at all, and got in touch with the scammer. I realized he was a scammer trying to scam us for a rental he didn't really own. And I ended up sending him emails warning him about Judgment Day, telling him to repent, that sort of thing. He ended up calling me on the phone, asking me to stop text messaging him. And I got talking to him on the phone, and I said, look, you could have a legitimate business. And he said, oh, really? Like, he seemed interested. I said, yeah. I said, look, here you are, hurting people, scamming them, and if you want to have a legitimate business, all you had to do was help people. And that's what business is all about, is helping people, serving people, meeting their needs. And he was like, you're right, you're right. I felt like there was a matter of conscience with him. He was being pricked in his conscience that, business is just about helping people. That's all it is. Anyways, back to these principles. The first one is to serve the public as nearly as we can to its complete satisfaction. Number 2, to offer the best possible dollar's worth of quality and value. And again, that's all you really want to do is offer people value, offer people quality, a fair trade, something that's actually worth their money. To strive constantly for a high level of intelligent and helpful service. To charge a fair profit for what we offer, and not all the traffic will bear. To apply this test to everything we do. Does it square with what is right and what is just? And so here, these are the Penney principles that he taught his people. Serve the public as best you can, satisfy their needs, do so fairly, wanting a fair profit, and quality and value, and what is right and what is just. I mean, these are good principles for life, not just for business. And then there was also, he had towards the later years of his life more speaking opportunities, speaking and traveling in different associations, business associations, but he also churches. He eventually was baptized and became a member of a church, that sort of thing. Again, whether he was a real Christian or not, I mean, all I know is this one little book that I read, but and every book is biased. Every presentation of anyone is one-sided, so who knows. But he also had a lecture as he was traveling, speaking at different places. It was called The Application of Christian Principles in Business. In other words, there's Christian principles that you can apply to your business. And that's what he specialized in lecturing on as he traveled. So I'll read some of those principles, page 144 of the book. This is what he said. He said, I believe in preparation. I believe in hard work. I believe in honesty. I believe in reposing confidence in men. I believe in appealing to the spirit in men. I believe in the practical application of the golden rule, as taught by the Master 2,000 years ago. Therefore, all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. So, these are the principles that he was a simple man. He had an idea for business. He met a legitimate need. He had a plan for growth. He became very successful and wealthy because of these things. He wasn't a genius. He applied Christian principles of ethics to his transactions in business. Nobody wants to do business with a thief or a scammer. Nobody wants to do business with a scoundrel who rips you off. And so you're going to establish a business in a community with returning customers. You want to run your business by the golden rule. So J.C. Penney became just very successful based on simple principles and simple ideas. This is what he said at the end of his life. And remember, this man had 1,900 stores or something by the end of his life, maybe even more. He said, what I have done, anyone could have done. He said, I haven't any special attainments. That's a good principle to understand in life. If someone else has done it, you can do it. All you have to do is know what they knew. If you're physically able like they are, if you're mentally able like they are, you can do whatever they've done. If you just learn what they learned and make the choices that they made. There's a principle I learned when I was in a certain ministry school. It was a group of men we used to meet, and the principle was, what one man can do, all men can do. And I think that's good not to put upon yourself limits or self-imposed limits that somehow you're less than other people, or that other people are superior to you. But that if you were given talents by God, you were given a mind by God, and what one man was able to accomplish, you're able to accomplish as well. He died in 1971 at the age of 95. he did marry again. He lost that wife just a few years later as well. So J.C. Penney had many triumphs and many tragedies. That's the story of everybody, right? But now, okay, talk about modern day. J.C. Penney is struggling, just like Sears, I think, is going out of business. I know the Sears in my town just had their liquidation, and so J.C. Penney, I looked it up. They have 138 stores that are closing this year. 138 stores, which is, I guess, 14% of their business. That's a big loss, 14%. It will affect about 5,000 employees because the marketplace is changing. Now everyone is buying things on their phone. People are buying things off of Amazon. Our needs have changed. Now we want one-click purchases with 2-day free shipping, right? And so a lot of these retail stores like Sears and J.C. Penney's are struggling because they're not adapting to the changing marketplace, to the changing culture. So the principle you have to understand here is you have to adapt or die. What worked 100 years ago might not work today. Things are going to social media. That's where you want to do a lot of advertising and marketing. Wherever the eyes go, that's where you want to advertise. And everyone's walking around looking at their phone, looking at their Facebook feed. That's the best place to advertise. So I don't know what J.C. Penney's plan is for their retail business, but they need to understand why they're struggling because of the changing market. And if their business model is just to meet the needs of the market, they need to understand those needs are changing. So going online, competing with Amazon, and of course there's still certain items people like to buy in person. I noticed that Sears and I think J.C. Penney's were trying to sell appliances. They remodeled their floor to sell appliances because people still buy appliances, in person. I've never bought a stove on Amazon or a fridge on Amazon. People like to buy those things in person. So they're still keeping with their retail business model, which is fine. Walmart seems to be doing fine. A retail store, Costco and Sam's Club, they seem to be doing fine as a retail store. But I think they need to focus more on online and internet marketing. And understanding the culture's changing. People want to buy things on their phone, one-click purchase, 2-day free shipping. That's just what we want, and that's what you have to compete with. So you need to understand and analyze your competitor, and to do better than them. So good life lessons from J.C. Penney, good business lessons from J.C. Penney, good ministry lessons. Whenever I read a book, obviously I'm thinking, how can I apply this to my ministry? And for me, obviously, it's having a plan of action, having a plan for growth. He like I said, he was a simple man with simple ideas, but he stuck to them, and it was a lifetime of growth. Growth doesn't happen overnight. It takes time to build a company. It takes time to build a ministry. It takes time to build anything, and so you just have to have a direction and have a plan of action, and then to stick to it. So, short little book. This is only like 150 pages. I sure enjoyed it. If you ever get a chance to read it, do so. What I just gave you was a good summary of his life, of his business, and I hope you were edified by it. Got some good key principles for your life, for your business, for your ministry. God bless you guys. I'll talk to you later.